Look at some of the great radical atheists. Look at one of their main arguments against God. We have Christopher Hitchens, Olav Shalom. God is not great, or Sam Harris, or Richard Dawkins. And they are basically almost as fundamentalist as the people they're criticizing. They're fanatics, atheist fanatics. And they rave against religion, and one of their critiques is that you see religion and its passion has brought a lot of destruction to this world. Some of them make arguments more destruction than anyone else. I don't know about that. Hitler and Stalin weren't exactly religious. But however, they do make the argument of religious wars. And we see it today. Look in the Middle East. You look at terrorism in the name of God. We're not talking about criminals who are trying to rob a bank or steal something. In the name of God, are ready to kill themselves and kill others. So if you're an outsider, an objective outsider, so to speak, I don't know if there's such a thing, but you look at religion. Religion is this, people in the name of God are ready to kill. What kind of God is this? What kind of religion is this? And then you look at the history of religion, especially in the last few thousand years, until basically 200-300 years ago, in the Western world, the church dominated, and it was basically terrorized all its subjects. Everyone has the classic story of Galileo having to recant his ideas because it was done against the church's doctrine. In other words, the battle, what we call between science and religion, between faith and reason, which began a few hundred years ago, was a backlash, and maybe a healthy backlash, against an abusive and a corrupt religion that was using God as an excuse to claim authority. And this still haunts us till this day. At the same time, you see religion has now gone away. Faith is still there. So some make the argument, faith, it's too risky. Once you bring God into the picture, people start thinking they have absolute monopoly on truth. And God, basically, they burn everything up around them. They're intolerant. Religion and intolerance are almost synonymous in most people's secular minds. And for good reason. You see it all the time. Recently we have all this embarrassing news coming out of cities in Israel of how so-called fundamentalist Jews behaving in very, very embarrassing ways to their neighbors. And I, for one, I'm embarrassed by these things because one of the hardest challenges I have to deal with is, of course, I'm stereotyped as well like that. I'm a beard and a yarmulke, so I must be one of these guys that spits and throws rocks at others. So it's not a simple matter to deal with. And it creates the impression, unfortunately, that that's what religion is about. So it is. It's religion basically consumes its inhabitants. It consumes those that come near it. And that obviously is definitely not what Moses or what God really wants. So that's one manifestation of it. And then, as I mentioned before, the other manifestation, as we see these musical geniuses and others who come to points of recognizing, touching deeper truths, and they do not have the capacity, or as the Kabbalists say, the containers, to come back and tell about it. And they burn out, as did the students of the children of Aaron, as did the three other sages who entered into the Pardes. And Moses was struggling with this dilemma from the beginning of his life. And the relevance of it here is critical, the relevance of it. And that will lead us, of course, to what the secret is. What is Rabbi Akiva's secret? And what did Moses discover? Why the Torah doesn't tell us what happened, actually. So you'll see, if you really read closely, it does tell us that the dilemma was resolved. So Moses is struggling with this thing. He sees a fire burning, a burning bush, and it's not being consumed. It's opposite of nature. Things that burn get consumed. You have a piece of wood or any other fuel that's ignited and lit. It may take time, but that fuel will run out. That wood will burn out, and unless you add more fuel, the matter will turn into energy. So what Moses was struggling with is, how do you see something here is matter, remains matter, is burning, and it's not being consumed? And why was he seeing it? Because this was both a philosophical and personal and psychological dilemma that Moses was struggling with. So let's go back a moment to the story of the bush. The bush was a thorn bush. A sneh in Hebrew is a thorn bush. It's considered to be the lowliest of all vegetation. A thorn bush. Thorn bushes grow in the most parched land. They don't bear fruit. And they're considered to be always symbols of pain. Thorns are always a symbol of pain, not a symbol of beauty. So the Medrash asks the question, the first time God appears to Moses, why does he appear to him in a thorn bush? Why doesn't he appear to him in a beautiful tree? An apple tree, a willow. You know, we have all kinds of nice, mighty oak tree. There are all kinds of trees to appear. So it's true, this was a wilderness in the desert, but hey, listen, since miracles are happening anyway, so why does he appear to him in a thorn bush? And the Medrash has a fascinating answer, because God and Moses understood each other, and God anticipated Moses' biggest question, which was, you're coming to tell me to go to the people and tell them they should have hope, and that they will be redeemed one day from their oppression. So I want to know one thing, and they will want to know one thing. Are you God with us only in beauty, or are you with us in pain and in our loneliness? The big question that we all ask when people are suffering and feel alone, and feel things are not working, the biggest question, where is God? Why isn't God here to help me now? And sometimes the way it's phrased is that God only appears when there's beautiful things. And Moses was wondering that. You know, maybe you're a God that only appears where it's beautiful, with His light, but with His darkness, with His loneliness, with His pain, you disappear. So God, in anticipating that, and that's what the Medrash says, I will appear in a thorn bush, not in a beautiful bush. To answer that question to Moses, to tell him, no, I am here with you in your void. I am here with you in your suffering. And though you may not feel that I'm there, I'm still there with you. Your work is to figure out how to meet me there. But I'm there with you. You know that classic greeting card, those two sets of footprints in the sand that describe the journey of life. And the person says, he sees the footprints, and sees two sets of footprints. And whenever he had a state of despair or loss, he sees only one set of footprints. And these two sets is God and you traveling through life. So the man asks God, why is it that whenever I was in trouble, I only see one set of footprints? Why did you forsake me then? And God said, I didn't forsake you. Those are my footprints. I was carrying you. So when we are in darkness, when we are suffering, we are blinded. That is essentially, if you want to visualize loneliness, visualize fear, visualize despair, it's a sense of isolation and a sense of blindness. We don't see clearly. That's how it is. It blinds us. That's how powerful it is. And it blinds us. We don't know what strengths we have. That's what makes it so difficult. If we knew what strengths we had, then if we were in a situation where things are difficult, you use your strengths and you get yourself out of the situation. The secondary problem is that fear paralyzes us. Darkness paralyzes us to deceive us into thinking you don't have the power to get out of this. And that's far worse than the initial problem. So they say, as Yudiyas HaMachla, the awareness of a problem is half the cure. But if you don't think you have a problem, or you feel completely powerless, it's very difficult to get out of that. That's why you find Jeremiah, when he describes in the book of Lamentations, it's the saddest book in the Bible, in the Torah. It's the book that we read on the night of Tisha B'Av, the saddest night in the Hebrew calendar. So it says there, it begins by Eicha Yoshva Badad. Woe, he says, alas, she sits alone. That's how he opens up the entire book. Now who's the she? He's talking about Jerusalem. That Jerusalem, woe to Jerusalem, she sits all alone. And the obvious question is, of all things, that's how he opens up the book. The holy temple is being destroyed in flames. The people are being massacred. Beginning a long exile that would just bring oppression after oppression. And of all things, Jeremiah begins, what bothers him is the loneliness. And if you think about it, that's exactly the issue. Because if we didn't feel so alone in our pain, we'd be able to get out of it. Pain makes you feel isolated. You feel no one's there with you. That when things are going well, people are around, but nobody wants to be with you when you're in despair. And nobody can really get you when you're in that place. And it's the loneliness that is ultimately the most debilitating factor. It may not be the worst part of the experience, but is the worst element of it. Because the loneliness means that you don't feel there's anyone that can help you. You don't feel that anyone cares. And that's the question we ask: does anyone care about me? That's what we ask when things are not working well. So God appears to Moses in a thorn bush. Says, "And not only do I care, I'm with you in the thorn bush." Again, here is not the place to discuss how God appears in darkness when you can't see Him. But suffice it to say, there's long discussions of how sometimes something exists inside of you, even though you absolutely don't see it. And sometimes it's more intense actually when you don't see it than when you do. So this leads now to the next stage. What Moses was struggling with was obviously the issue of evil, the issue of a Holocaust. Where is God in the Holocaust? Where is a good God in all this darkness in our lives? And Moses was wondering about these questions, not just for himself, but for generations to come, which is why it's all documented. So the first question was, is God there? And the second question is, can we contain God? That's the question. And that's the issue of the burning bush. Can you contain these forces and not be consumed? And this is a dilemma, as I said, a philosophical one. The mystics have always wondered. Because if you can say, one second, if there's an expression in some of the Jewish philosophers, they say, can you know God? And one of them answers, if I knew Him, I would be Him. If I knew Him, I would be Him. Which means, essentially, you can argue, you and God cannot coexist. If you want to be with God, you have to give up your individuality. You may get something much greater in return, but it's not you any longer. Or if you want to be you, you're going to have some concealed form of God. Which is really a question also, if you think about it, about relationships. Can two people who are distinct individuals, both with their strengths, and I'm talking about healthy, not where one is annihilated by the presence of another, can two people, two independent circles, join as one, maintain their individuality, and have absolute seamless love for each other? It would seem impossible. Or logic would dictate it's impossible. Because how could two people that have different interests, they come from different backgrounds, they will have disagreements. So you could see love is a form of compromise. Because we love each other. I give in a little, you give in. But can we maintain a fierce individuality and independence and still be one with another? This is a dilemma. And you'll find in Jewish mysticism, you'll find different opinions. Some say, you want your individuality, you can't have the full experience of the other. Some say you want the experience of the other, you can't have your complete individuality. And ultimately, the Arizal and the mystics that come after him, especially in Hasidic thought, go on to an entire discussion of how you can have both, the best of both worlds. But there's a secret ingredient to get there. Because it doesn't seem logical. How could I have individuality and completely join another human being? And all this is what Moses was struggling with, and all this is what the tree that burns and doesn't get consumed is about. It means you can burn with passion and not hurt yourself and hurt others. Is that possible? Many people will describe their lives. When I was younger and more energetic and wilder, I had a fiery revolutionary spirit, and it was great, but I ended up hurting myself and hurting others. I came to realize that the only way to really live is I have to give up some of my passion. Because the fires of passion, unbridled, untempered, will destroy me or others. And logic would, as I said, seems to support that. But here, the vision of Moses was, no, it's not. It's not correct. It doesn't have to be that way. And Judaism is built on the principle that it's absolutely not that way. But here's the secret answer. If you read the next verse, so it says that Moses went to see this sight. He wanted to see, how does this happen? How does something burn and not be consumed? And as I mentioned, in history, you find everybody that burned too much got consumed. Or they stopped burning, or they had to slow down their burning if they weren't going to get consumed. As I said, if the faucet breaks or tears open, the flow is too much, it's overwhelming. So it says that God says to Moses, Moses, Moses. And he says, here I am. He says, don't go continue because you're walking on sacred ground. and he says, remove your shoes from your feet, because it's sacred ground. Then Moses hides his face. What is the meaning of this statement here? Basically, it was like this. Moses was intrigued by this sight, and God was reminding him that if you ever want to be able to reconcile and burn with passion and not be consumed, you can't be driven by your self-interest. Even your interest in discovering what the mystery is behind this paradox. And that's when Moses says, here I am, which means he recognizes that he's not here just for his own selfish gain, but he's here to serve God, serve a higher calling. And Moses takes off his shoes, which is symbolic of giving up some of your needs, a certain humility. That humility is the secret ingredient to enter the Holy of Holies and not get burned. And it's only those people that were humble in that experience that were able to combine the two. And that's why Moses hides his face. So that is exactly the answer. That's exactly the response to what Moses was coming to discover. He found his answer. That's why he doesn't continue asking God, how is this bush not being burned? So let's explain this for a moment. Humility. The problem with the sons of Aaron was they were not driven for any negative or evil interests. They weren't trying to make money. It wasn't about their honor. They were very passionate souls who said, hey, here's an experience. I can enter into the Holy of Holies. I can experience a moment of spiritual ecstasy, unprecedented. The problem was there was too much of the I could experience. I want it. And the key secret is, as you want it too much, then it's on your terms. And if it's on your terms, that's where it cannot coexist with God. As soon as you recognize that it's not about you, and doesn't begin with you, and you're able to give up that you, that's when you can coexist. Now the interesting thing, that doesn't mean you're giving up your individuality. It means you're giving up your self-contained sense of fulfillment. And here's the interesting thing. Remember I referred to this earlier. Later on, Moses asked God to show me your face. This was in a moment of intimacy, literally intimacy with God, where Moses is praying for the people because they had built a golden calf. It's also bad times. And he elicits from God the deepest secrets of compassion. It's called the 13 divine attributes of compassion, which we invoke every Yom Kippur. God reveals to him the secret of how to awaken compassion in me when all else seems to fail. It's a pretty powerful thing. God is saying, here's the secret. Call these names. Say these words. Say them with your heart, and I will hear you. So at that moment, Moses has a desire. His desire is, I want to see your face. No one has ever seen God's face. So he says, show me your glory, show me your face. And God says the immortal words that I mentioned earlier, no man can see my face and live. But listen to the end of the story. So God then comes back to Moses and says, you know what, I will show you my back, but my face you will not see. So the question is asked, why does God have to rub it in? He already told him no man can see me and live. So he says, okay, I will show you my back. Why does he have to say, but my face you will not see? As if to make it very clear, my face you will not see. And another question is this, Moses was what could call one of the wisest men, maybe the wisest of all. He understood what he needed God to tell him, you can't see my face and live. Well, why did he ask? And why are we told that he asked when he was rejected? So one of the commentaries explains it in a fascinating way. I want to discuss this here. It says the way you're supposed to read the verse is as follows. And then I'll explain it in more palatable terms. I hope this is not getting too mystical here. And that is, God says to Moses, I will show you my back and my face. That's how you should read it. But my face you will see by not looking. So instead of reading, I will show you my back and my face you will not see, to read it, I will show you my back and my face, but my face you will see by not looking. Which means there are two ways to experience a real, true experience. We call one is interpolation, one is extrapolation. One is direct sight. You see something, and you can describe what you see. Another, you see it through its reflection, through its, let's say, through process of elimination. I'll just use an example. No one has ever seen the unconscious. That's why it's called unconscious. And if someone has seen it, usually, as I mentioned, will probably be someone that's more mad than sane. Yet, we have people who claim to be experts on the unconscious. And you go to therapy. Okay, I'm not saying all therapists are good, but let's say some are good. What can they see in you that you don't see in yourself? And what can they see in the forces, the trained eye? What do they see and how can they see it? If the unconscious remains behind the curtain, how do we ever see the unconscious? So here's an example. I'll just give you an example. Imagine an imaginary wall that's shrouded in darkness. You cannot see the wall, but you know there's a wall there. You cannot go over and touch it, and you can't shine a light on it. Is there any way for you ever to figure out what this wall looks like? Is it a straight wall? Is it a jagged wall? Is it bent? What kind of wall is it? So yes, there is one way. You have a ball and you bounce it against the wall. And what you see, you don't see the wall, you see how it bounces back. If it bounces back straight, you know that part of the wall is straight. If it bounces back to the right, you know that part of the wall is jagged to the left. And you keep bouncing it enough times, you can get almost a real image of the wall without ever touching it, seeing it, through its reaction. A trained person who understands psychological forces, especially the unconscious, in a way, just like when you go to a doctor, and the doctor says, okay, I have a pain in my hand, God forbid. So he starts touching, pulling, okay, does it hurt, does it hurt, does it hurt? So he starts getting to the more sensitive area. So you know there's a nerve or whatever it is, and that way, it's not like you can actually see it, but by process of elimination, you see how you react. In a conversation, this is also true. Someone who's trained and really knows how to do this will have a conversation with you, and will ask questions. And you'll think they're just innocent questions, but the way you answer, and the way you resist answering, and the things you avoid going to, is clear sign there's something there. So, you're not seeing the unconscious, but you're bouncing a ball off of it. And very often that's the case. Exactly where somebody doesn't want to talk about that, so usually where the problem is, of course. Because the nerve is raw there. You don't want to go there. It's too tender. And it's not because you're being secretive or it's just like a reaction. It's a knee-jerk reaction. So you can never see the unconscious, but you can see it by not looking. And this is the secret to true relationships and everything. One of the things, we live in a society that is driven by acquisition. You want something, you want to own it. You want to acquire it. You want to possess it. We don't appreciate, and we're not trained to think in terms of truths that emerge. That you cannot acquire. Money can't buy it. It's not a cliche. Money cannot buy love. Love emerges. Truth emerges. God emerges. Everything real truly emerges. Cannot be bought. So we're trained to think, I can just go and get it. Here are 10 steps. Secrets to love. 20 steps, the secret to efficiency. And so on. The reason these books still remain on the bestseller list is obviously they're not working, or else no one would buy any more. Why would you buy another one? But it's the aspiration, Like someone told me, the journey, the destination is the journey, is the seeking out. Not necessarily you're ever going to get what you want, but the art of acquiring of emerging things is not something that we are trained, because it's much more subtle. And it requires a tool that our society does not cherish. It's called the tool of humility. It's the tool of restraint. It's the tool of silence. You want to hear truths, you have to know how to be silent. You have to listen well. You want to hear music, you can't allow the rush hour and other extraterrestrial, extracurricular noises drown out the sounds. Every one of us has a sound. You listen to someone that you love or you care about, there are words that they won't say, but if you are able to go away, if you're able to get rid of yourself, put yourself aside, you're able to suspend yourself, you can hear other sounds. People who listen well are able to suspend themselves. All those that suspend themselves can see deeper truths. But this is something that is not taught in school, because school we're taught, here are the instruments, here are the tools, go and use them, and be aggressive, because if you don't do it, no one's going to do it for you. That may be all good in material things. Nothing that is energy related or spiritual related can be experienced that way. And that's what Moses saw. He saw matter burning. The bush was burning, and it was not being consumed. So he was wondering, matter is consumed. Matter turns into energy. But here it wasn't being consumed. How is that possible? The answer is, once you experience bittul, that Hebrew word, the only thing that can disappear, that can be consumed, is something that's not consumed with itself. As soon as you are an ego or an entity, just like you were born, you can die. What cannot die? Something that wasn't born. Selflessness cannot disappear, because the more it disappears, the more powerful it becomes. You see? So when a person is not defined, does not define themselves by their presence, but they define themselves by their lack of presence, that can never be taken from them. Those are the people that live on forever. Anyone that builds monuments for themselves and makes a big name for themselves, there comes a point where that name will die, where their presence will die, where their influence will die. And when they're dead, some people will be even happy that they're not here anymore, because their power was only there when they wielded it. And then there are people who are here that we can talk about. Here, Moses, almost 3,500 years ago, 3,300 years ago. And we talk about him as if he's here, because he was never taken by himself. He was what's called the humblest man that ever walked on earth. And it was the humility. It was then that you're able to see that which you cannot see when you go with your presence. So interestingly, when we talk about faith and reason, some people think faith is absence of reason. When all else fails, okay, I have some faith, it's my crutch, I rely on it. Maybe faith is not the absence of reason. Maybe faith is the door that you enter after reason. Reason brings you to certain steps. Informed faith is not the faith of a child that has no reason. Informed faith is the faith that comes after reason. When a person falls in love with someone and they decide to marry, they decide to commit the rest of their lives to this person, is this an act of reason? Is this a logical thing to do? There's always risks. There's always risks. So what is really going on? What's going on is that your reason leads you to a place that this person seems to be the right person, but there's always a door you have to enter. And I won't necessarily call it purely faith. It could be intuition, it could be a sense, but there is a risk, because if you want to take no risks, you're not going to make any commitments in your life. That's it. No risks, no commitment. As soon as there's commitment, there's going to be some element of risk. But if it's an intelligent risk, means it comes a faith that follows reason. So Moses was considered a person who was an ultimate person of faith and the ultimate mind, and there were no contradiction. So it says that Moses was the humblest man that walked on earth. The word is anav. And what is a humble anav? There's another word in Hebrew, it's called shuffle. The difference between anav, a humble person, and a shuffle, in simple English, anav is a humble person, shuffle is a person of low self-esteem. Or in different terms, humility, true humility comes from strength. Shuffle, low self-esteem, comes from weakness. Humility is often confused with weakness. But the truly humble person is the strongest of all. He's secure enough, or she's secure enough, to be able to be humble. Doesn't always have to be heard, doesn't always have to be pronounced, and is completely fine. A shuffle is someone who has low self-esteem, doesn't feel they're worth anything. A humble person knows his or her value, knows that they're indispensable, knows that they have qualities. Moses knew of his strengths, he was no pushover. But this is the key to a humble person. He never thought that his strengths are his own. He knew they were a gift. And he said to himself that if someone else was given this gift, they would have done better than I. That's a true man of power. Because he has the powers, and he never takes himself that seriously. And that's the hardest of all things. So when a person is consumed with fire, when a person is passionate, someone that's mediocre people don't usually cause too much damage. They cause mediocre damage. Passionate and powerful, fiery people can cause a lot of damage, like fire. So a fiery, passionate person with a rebellious spirit, with fervor, with zeal, with all the intensity, a person like that can go two ways. They can be very destructive. They can be very powerful. and very constructive. But the secret key, the key to that type of person is humility. Is the only counterforce to their passion. Because if there's passion, they'll say in the name of passion, everything is justified. I'm a passionate person. And the fact that some people are going to be stepped on, or some people are going to be hurt or damaged, too bad. This is the price you pay for my passion. Humility is the counterforce to passion. So naturally, passion will happen naturally what will happen to the children of Aaron, to the other 3 sages. They get burned out by their own passion. They destroy themselves with their passion. As all those men I mentioned earlier, the guys who burned out, whatever it was. It is, Rabbi Akiva knew the secret of Shalom, of entering in peace, entering with humility. He realized, I'm going into a place, it's not about me. He wasn't excited. The children of Aaron were too excited about it. You think, what's wrong with being excited about having a divine experience? Wow, that's unbelievable. They weren't excited about some type of selfish material experience, about making money, or about something. They were excited about it, but their excitement was their undoing, because I'm there. Are you? Then you cannot see me and live. Moses was able to shed the eye, and Rabbi Akiva was able to shed the eye, and let the experience emerge. And if I have the gift to be able to be there, I feel honored. But it's not about me experiencing ecstasy. It's not about me experiencing love. I am now a man or a woman that has seen the truth. The I has to get out of there. And once the I gets out of there, then matter does not get consumed. And that's what Moses recognized. When he saw the burning bush, he saw it wasn't being consumed. So his eye was very intrigued. He went closer to see it. And then what happened was, suddenly God's voice emerged. And Moses recognized, and he stopped, and he said, I am here. I'm present. I am here, not about me. I'm here to serve. Hineni. I'm here for you. And as a result of that, God says to Moses, this is sacred ground. And Moses takes off his shoes. So that's a sense of humility. Had he not taken off his shoes, had he just continued marching in, then he would have been consumed and the bush would have been consumed. And Moses understood that, and he took off his shoes, and that's when he covers his face. He doesn't want to see. That is the true humble person. It says in the sages say, interesting statement, they say, a person who pursues honor, the honor will elude you. A person who escapes honor, the honor pursues you. That's what it says. Kol haberech min hakoved, hakoved berech acharav. Kol haberech el hakoved, hakoved berech. Now, someone who pursues honor, the honor eludes him, is because it's not real. But somebody who wants to go the other direction, doesn't want the honor pursues you. Now, it doesn't mean to run away from honor and look over your shoulder if it's pursuing you, obviously. That's not exactly the way it's supposed to be. So it's a truly humble person who takes something higher than himself, more seriously than himself. And that's the secret of the burning bush. The secret of real success. Now, it's not easy. Because as I said, we live in a society we're not trained like this. This requires true reprogramming. We are trained to be as great as we can become. Now, this doesn't sound bad, right? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with being the best you can be? Actualizing your potential. What's wrong with that? Nothing wrong with that, except one thing. It will die with you. Because it's only as powerful as you are. Interesting elevator experience. When you are dedicated to yourself, as great as you are, there's a limit. When you're dedicated to a cause greater than yourself, then you become an extension of that cause. When you're dedicated to eternity, you become an extension of eternity. So how does one achieve that? You know, that everybody pursues the fountain of youth, paradise. We want immortality. In different ways. Some do it through cryogenic freezing. The pharaohs of old try to lock themselves in their pyramids with their brides. Yeah, they all died. And maybe there's some memories of some of their technologies and their teachings. But eternity is it belongs to the domain only of those that don't allow themselves to get in the way. And that's the art that we have to master. It's the art of listening is the art of emerging, is the art of suspending part of yourself to allow something greater to emerge. This is the real secret of love. It would be nice if we could teach this to our children, so we don't have to start working backwards when we get into adults, turn into adults and start trying to figure out how to build healthy, loving relationships. Because the fact is, we have been programmed to think love is just another commodity. Yes, it's of course a little more complicated and more subtle than buying a loaf of bread, but it's a commodity that we have to find a way to conquer, to own, to possess. And people are struggling and desperate in relationships, trying to find control. What happens if you discover that love can't be controlled? What happens is only when you give up control is when it actually becomes yours. That's pretty terrifying for some people, for many of us, because we don't like to think that way. Control means I can control. It means I can turn it on when I want, I can turn it off. Moses understood the secret. You give up control, that's when you get real control. And there's no tricks. There's no way to fake it. You cannot fake God. You cannot fake truth, and you cannot fake true love. It emerges to those that allow it to who suspend their self-interest and allow it to emerge in their lives. So there are many, many lessons that we can derive from this story of the burning bush. Both in the context of being passionate and at the same time coexisting with others. It's only possible if your passion becomes an agent of some higher cause. If it's your passion about your interests, it has to end up hurting somebody. There's no way around it. It may not be today, it'll be tomorrow, because there's going to be conflict. If it's a passion that's not about you alone, then there's room. If someone was, I was recently counseling a couple who definitely loved each other, but they came to an impasse, they came to a point where they just were simply unable to coexist. And their interests were, in many ways it was clear to me that they were meant to be with each other. There wasn't no doubt, there was no mistake here. But they screwed up. They screwed up a lot of things, and then you start the vicious cycle to a point where it's very difficult to repair. Like any little infection, it begins to fester and fester until a point where it's hard to repair. And I remember when we were sitting and speaking, and I said to them, you're both so passionate about your opinions, and you may be both right even. But one thing I don't hear, you're not passionate about your relationship, you're passionate about your opinion. Maybe if one of you or both of you would be passionate about your connection with each other, then you'd figure out how to maintain this connection. All this passion you're doing is becoming a passion about my understanding of it, my interest. So I said, it may be correct, but that's not the ingredients of a relationship. So I remember he says to me, the guy said, but if my interests are not being met, then how am I going to be in this relationship? I don't want to give up my interests. And it was very hard for me to explain, and I wasn't able to, at that point at least, to explain. I said, what you're saying is a contradiction. What do you want? You want your interests, and you want a relationship with another person who has other interests. How exactly is that going to work? So he says, well, that's why we came to you. So I said, okay, so if you came to me, let me tell you how it works. For now, get all your interests off the table. Figure out how you two, the interest is only one, how you two should be together in a kind way. Get all the interests off the table, period. And then you'll get your interests satisfied. But if you're going to begin and end there, it's over. There's nothing to talk about, because you have interests and so does she. And that's simple as that. Why should she give up her interests? Because you're not ready to give up yours. So how are we going to deal with this? Who's going to win? How you has to win? But that's what happens. You get trapped in that mentality that it's either me or you, or compromise. But the commitment to say, 1 second, maybe there's a third entity here that's invisible. When we at a chuppah, at a wedding ceremony, you have the hovering third invisible ingredient called God. Maybe the passion should be, what does God want from this? What do we call the transcendent element in this relationship that is not you and not her? That is more than the sum of the parts. What do you want to build together? When you start focusing on that, that doesn't mean you don't get your interests and needs met, because then it comes back to you. Because once you have that bond, then the interests will be met. When someone loves somebody, they go out of their way to satisfy them. They go out of their way to help them. But if it becomes you versus me, why would I go out of my way to help you? You want what you want, I want what I want, and that's where we get stuck. Now I know it's easier said than done. what I said makes sense on paper. But whenever you're in the emotional state, you don't feel that. You don't feel that. And at that moment, you're blinded. And you can't see what the other person's saying. You can't see what you're saying, really. And essentially, that's where most problems begin and end. Now, of course, when you enter into a relationship with that a sense of suspension of self, and you see, I keep reiterating, I don't mean annihilation of self. I'm not talking about compromising yourself. I'm talking about suspension in order to gain something greater. A simple example would be listening. You want to learn something new, you have to listen. Why? Because if you don't listen, you're going to only know what you knew till now. So the smarter you are, the more you have to listen, because you have so much and so much wisdom up till now. You want to hear something new, you need to listen. Now, listening means suspending your intelligence. It means suspending your processing, suspending all your analysis. Because if you don't suspend it, then it's just you again trying to understand and listening to another person share something that maybe you haven't heard before. It's not easy for an intelligent person to do. Because the more you know, and the more confident you are in your tools, the less patience and restraint you have to really open up to another person. But without that, there's no growth. So essentially, that's called suspension of self. You suspend where you are right now in order to absorb something bigger, and then you become, and you can bring yourself back into it. That's the key. And that's what Moses understood, and that's what Rabbi Akiva understood. And that's what hopefully each of us here understands. So, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have your passion and your fires, and actually not only have it, but it can become even more intense, because you know that it will not hurt. On the contrary, it will make people grow. So Rabbi Akiva, after he came out of the orchard, he only improved his and everybody's life around him. And he had a student called Rab Shimon Bar Yochai who learned from his teacher and had a similar experience. For 12 years he had to hide in a cave from the Romans, who were decreed that he should be killed because of his teaching, his studying and teaching of Torah. So he hid in a cave. Rosh Hashanah Bar Yochai, the story of Lag BaOmer, we go to Israel after Passover, Lag BaOmer, the pilgrimage is up north, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's grave in the city of Meron. So, Rabbi Akiva's student, so after 12 years, you can imagine that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Rabbi Elazar were so refined and so separate from civilization, they were extremely, extremely lofty state. And the Talmud tells us, it's a fascinating story, that wherever they would go, after they came back, after the decree was over or the emperor died, they were able to come back home. And they came back to civilization and they saw the pettiness, the superficiality, the plain greed and foolishness of people. It says, whatever Rav Shimon Bar Yochai looked at began to burn. Yet again, burning. Began to burn. Whether physically or figuratively. So God says to him, no, that's not the way. That's not the path of the Torah. The path of the Torah is its paths are paths of pleasantness, and all its roads are roads of peace. Like Rabbi Akiva, you go back one more year, a 13th bar mitzvah year. God sent him back, not because of the decree. You go back one more year and develop the maturity, the spiritual maturity, that you control your fires. When you come back after 13 years, after the 13th year, wherever you go, instead of it burning, figure out ways to improve it, to repair it. And that's what happened. After the 13th year, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai developed that maturity, that whatever he saw that was petty, that seemed simple, superficial, he helped elevate it and repair it in some way. Now you would think that Rabbi Shimon after 12 years was a much more powerful person. Everything burned. Everything that was inferior burned. But that's not the way. It's far greater to have restraint and be able to, as I mentioned with the tzimtzum, be able to transmit a flow that elevates than one that destroys. So his eyes were very powerful, but what he burned, whatever he looked at was consumed. And to be a bush that does not consume, you can be a godly person and you don't kill yourself for infidels. But on the contrary, you figure out ways to elevate them. You figure out ways to inspire them. That's far more spiritual person than a person that burns everything around them. And each of us has many manifestations of this. Moments of passion, the things that you are most passionate or believe most, how much tolerance do you have when you are in that state? And that tolerance is direct proportion to how much humility you have. You have humility and passion, you have the secret to change the world. You have passion without humility, very powerful, but it can be very destructive. And of course, if you have humility without passion, then that speaks for itself. Then it's not going anywhere too much either. So you need to have all of it together. And like that girl that comes home from school, she gets a B+. Her father says, listen, either an A+ or an F. Anything but mediocre. Either excellence or complete failure. So, I wish you all, in this week of Shmos, where we begin the second book of the Torah, the book of Exodus, the book of Shmos, the book of Moses, where we start reading about the little child Moses growing into an adult. We all have a Moses within us, and we all have many burning bush opportunities. And the beauty is, Einstein said, E equals mc squared. Matter and energy are reversible. Obviously, on a spiritual level, it means that matter and energy do not have to consume one another. They could coexist. And the burning bush, if you wanted to study of physics in the burning bush, was matter that did not become consumed. Matter that became energy, and matter remained matter. That would be an interesting fusion, which Judaism, Jewish thought, always believed that's what the ultimate goal would be. That we don't have to annihilate or destroy an apocalypse of this material universe, that the world of matter, the material universe, can become a body of energy. Actually, it is energy, except it's concealed energy. So when we use our tables and our chairs and our food and our work and everything that we are, all the material part of our corner of the world, and we use it for spiritual purposes, we essentially are converting matter into energy without the matter being destroyed, with the matter itself becoming illuminating, like a bush that continues to burn, but it continues to remain a bush. So I wish this upon all of us, to find it in our own relationships, to find that passionate, romantic relationship with another human being, where two individuals can become a whole, an entity that is more than the sum of the parts, and find it also in our own, in all the different ways that this manifests in our daily lives. So with that being said, I conclude by wishing you all a very pleasant week. It's a real honor to share and speak with you all. And I want to just announce that Philip's class won't be taking place tomorrow night. It will resume next week. Those of you that please leave your email address with us so we can remain in contact. And I hope to see you next week. No one should be consumed. A fire is that burn, but without the consumption part. A nice blend of the two. So thank you very much.